Good afternoon. It's good to see you all here. I'm going to do my best to get through this. I have my Kleenex. We never thought this day would come, but it has. And while we miss Dad, we are rejoicing that we know where he is. So let's get started. Charles Frederick Shifley was born on a farm in North Robinson, Ohio, on October 6, 1937. He was the seventh child of Hattie and Charles Shifley. His parents hoped when he was born, I'm told, that he would be a girl, so his only sister Mary would have a companion. Thankfully, from my point of view anyway, that didn't happen. But he was always very close to Mary. Dad often talked to us, his kids, about what it was like to grow up in rural Ohio in the 1940s. He talked about how he had a wagon and a pet goat to pull it. He talked about the time the electric company came to install electricity in his farmhouse for the first time. And of course, there was talk about the outhouse and using the Sears catalog as toilet paper. And I think as a young boy, that's the story I really laughed and appreciated the most. Throughout his formative years, he spent a lot of time with his older brothers, Calvin, Orlo, Herb, and John. His brothers taught him a lot about life, about cars, and much about how to treat people. He often said that he remembered his mother, Grandma Shifley, telling one of his brothers or another, "Take Charles with you," when they were going out on an errand or just to mess around. He said he never remembered any of them ever complaining. One of his favorite stories he told was that one time, when he was a boy, a bee landed on his toe. One of his brothers, I think it was John, was standing nearby with a shovel and told Dad, who was quite distressed, "Be still." John evidently raised the shovel, whacked at the bee, and missed. According to Dad, though, John did not miss his toe. And to make matters worse, the bee stung Dad. In school, he dabbled in sports and had a few part-time jobs. He played football and basketball. He talked about sweeping up hair in the barber shop or delivering papers or scooping ice cream at Isley's. He sang in the choir. One story that my mom tells has him hanging outside the high school choir room with his buddies until the bell rang. I guess the rule was that you had to be in the classroom by the time the bell stopped ringing. Well, it seems that the bell finally rang, and he and two of his friends rushed to get in the choir room all at one time, and they pretended to get stuck in the door. Needless to say, they were late and had to go to the office. And speaking of Mom, when Dad was 17 and going to Bucyrus High School, a 15-year-old girl named Penny Tufford caught his eye. A double date with some friends, a few years of dating, and the rest is history. That's all Mom will allow me to say about that. Soon after they were married, Mom and Dad both became Christians through the influence of Billy Graham and started attending Bible studies at a place called Grace Haven Farm. Dad credits these studies at Grace Haven as helping form and mature his faith in God through Jesus Christ. And of course, many of us here know that Grace Haven Farm eventually became Grace Fellowship Church. People like Ray and Eunice Nethery, John and Donna Kurtz, Nancy Ritz, Richard and Susan Buzza were alongside him in this journey as Dad, with Mom, attended Bucyrus Community Church in the 80s, and eventually Ray and Eunice Nethery's home group, of which Dad and Mom remain a part of to this day. Dad's first job was at General Hydraulics in Bucyrus. Dad was a mechanical engineer, and it was obvious even back then that he had a knack for this sort of thing. I remember as a young kid occasionally driving by General Hydraulics on Sandusky Avenue with Mom, beeping the horn by his office window and being delighted when Dad's hand would appear from behind the curtains and wave. He worked there for about 18 years. Then one day, Dad met a man named Tom Connor, who asked him to come to Cleveland to check out a new company in Berea, Ohio, called General Hone. Dad obliged, and as he met the people who worked there, he was impressed. He really liked them, and he was especially drawn to the owner of the company, Joe Hosepian. He eventually was offered a job there, and that started at least 27 years of professional happiness and satisfaction. Affectionate stories about Joe Hosepian, Tom Connor, John and Jamie Hosepian, Chuck Walls, Bob Worley, Dave McCormick, and many others were told around our dinner table many nights during the week. It was real obvious that while Dad enjoyed his work a lot, he enjoyed the people he worked with more. And I have to mention here that General Hone eventually moved to Ashland. And Dad drove to Ashland from Bucyrus for many years, so his kids did not have to experience the emotional trauma of changing schools. That's the kind of man he was. After General Hone was sold to the Sun Corporation and moved to St. Louis, Dad, along with Mom, of course, was asked to move to St. Louis to help the merging of General Hone products into the Sun product line. There he worked with people like Derek West, who Dad liked and talked about a lot. But after about 3 years in Missouri, he missed being around his family in Ohio. It was about then that he started to hear about a new company in Ashland called Ohio Tool Works, or OTW, started by John Hosepian, who is Joe Hosepian's son. So in 2008, Mom and Dad moved back to Ohio, and Dad began to work at OTW. Now you need to remember that at this point, Dad was 70 years old. Now, I've spoken a couple times about Dad's love for his family, and I can pretty safely say that nothing was more important to him than them. He loved his kids. There were 3 of us, Melinda, Kara, and me. I, like my dad, am the baby of the family. As we 3 talked about Dad since he passed away, we all seem to have seen him in similar but different ways. Melinda, the oldest, always thought that Dad knew how to do everything and that had the right answer in most practical situations. He fixed up so many things in every house she and her husband Tom have had. He not only physically did things, but he just knew a lot. He mentioned that when she mentioned that when she was buying her first house, he went with her on a walkthrough before she made the offer. The homeowners were there in a different room, but within earshot. Dad kept loudly pointing out things that he thought were wrong with the house, trying to make the owners think that she wasn't that interested in it. And it was tough, because Melinda really wanted the house. And yes, she did get the house. Tom, her husband, would say about any number of things, maybe we should ask your dad about it. And Melinda remembers, as do all 3 of us, going jogging with Dad late at night in the summer or riding bikes alongside him while he jogged. I don't think Dad jogged all that often. But for some reason, those memories stick with all 3 of us. We'd come home and make popcorn and eat it in our screened-in garage on a big swing. He'd made those screens, and he'd put up that swing. We always had popcorn on Sunday afternoons, and after we ate it, it was kind of the signal that the weekend was over. We'd all get depressed that school was the next day. Dad's mom, Grandma Shifley, was an extraordinary cook and an exceptional baker. She would make homemade pretzels that the entire family loved, and they were one of the many things we all missed after she passed away. Melinda was able to capture the recipe for these pretzels and master the art of making them. She normally makes them once or twice a year, usually as Christmas gifts because they're not easy to make. She made them for Dad a few weeks ago as a surprise because she knew he would be starting up a new type of chemo and was afraid he wouldn't be able to eat them after that. And we're all really glad he got to have them. We know that he was a normal person, saved by the mercy and grace of Jesus. But he sure seemed as good as any person could ever be. Kara's earliest memories of Dad mostly surround some crisis or another. Once she was stung by a bee and just sat on a neighbor's stoop crying, screaming according to Melinda. And Dad had to come and get her. The problem was that Dad had poison ivy. He was highly allergic to poison ivy. And he had even taken off work that day. And those of you who know Dad know he never takes off work. He must have been in bad shape. As he walked over to get her, he was all wrapped up in bandages. He looked like a mummy. He used to take all of us sledding all the time at Bucyrus Country Club. And every single time he had to drag all of us back up the hill. I don't know how many times he marched up that hill with one of the three of us in tow behind him on a sled, but it seems like he did it over and over again, tirelessly. He still rescued Kara from crises even when she was older, like the time she drove Melinda's car into the side of the garage. Sorry, Kara. The time, not very many years ago, that she backed her van into Dad's car in her driveway. Sorry again, Kara. He never got mad. He just took care of things and then teased Kara about it all the time. Kara was not a morning person growing up, and he relentlessly would sing, "Here comes the grump, here comes the grump," every morning as she made her way to the breakfast table. Even though Mom would say, "Charlie, quit it. Would you just cut it out?" Every time. And we can't forget his wonderful piano playing of Down Yonder. And before Dad got his hearing aids, it was quite an experience to call Mom and Dad on the phone. Any one of us would be talking to Mom, and then she would say, "Just a minute, let me get your dad." And then we'd hear, "Charlie, Charlie, Charlie." And then he would answer faintly in the background, "What?" And Mom would yell, "Kara's on the phone." He was a great father to Kara's husband, Wayne, too. Wayne remembers being with him underneath their old Plymouth, fixing something. The car started to roll, and Dad jumped out from under the car to put the car in park, just as it started to roll over Wayne's foot. In fact, he taught all of us everything we know about fixing things, from putting up a ceiling fan to changing the oil in our cars. It will be hard now not to be able to say, "I'll call Dad and ask him," when something complicated pops up and needs fixing. And then there's me. I remember a lot of firsts with Dad. My first baseball. The first time I threw a football. There was my first Indians baseball game when I was about 3 years old. And we had to leave early because I missed playing on my swing set. When my uncle was getting married somewhere in southern Ohio, Dad took me to get my first tuxedo. On the way there, he had a hold of my hand and he mistakenly walked me into a concrete pillar. That was the first time I had ever been knocked out cold. And when Mom saw the bruise on my forehead, though, it was not the first time she let Dad have it. He coached me on getting my first job, which I got because I wanted to buy my first car. With that car, he helped me change my first transmission, replace my first floorboard, and have my first experience with Bondo. He helped me get my first bank account, catch my first fish, and pitch my first tent. I helped Dad, with Mom of course, have some of his first experiences too. I brought his first daughter-in-law into his life, who he embraced and accepted completely. His first passport, his first trip to Pakistan, first trip to Thailand, where he missed experiencing his first tsunami only by a couple of days. First trip to Hawaii, Malaysia, Greece, and of course India, where he experienced his first near-death experience in the New Delhi traffic. In a way, that is true to his nature. He was the first in our immediate family. In a way that was true to his nature, he was the first in our immediate family to get sick with cancer, and the first to enter heaven. Because of this, he led the way and showed us how to suffer and eventually die well. I'm incredibly grateful to him for this, and to know he's in heaven getting things ready for us. And then came along the grandkids, raising Dad's pride and pleasure to a whole new level. Nothing, not even bad health, could keep him away from special occasions and school performances. There were trips to Perrysburg to see Sam, Joe, and Annie perform in school bands and sports programs, then trips to BGSU to see Sam, then Joe, perform in the BGSU marching band, and trips to Columbus and other places to see Annie play her trumpet or participate in a soccer tournament. There were even more trips to see Deanna and Elena in Akron, or, more recently, in Cedarville and Grove City. He traveled to Grove City to see Elena perform in the marching band, and traveled to Cedarville to be with Deanna on Grandparents' Day. Just last Saturday, a week ago, he was at Cedarville for Deanna's senior piano recital. He wasn't feeling well, but he sat proudly next to me and beamed as she made her way through the lovely pieces. In that first passport, it wasn't just because Dad wanted to travel. Dad traveled to Greece, Malaysia, Thailand, and India for one reason: to see my kids, Nathaniel and Abby. We have wonderful memories of Dad with us at the Parthenon, the Taj Mahal, and on quiet Southeast Asian beaches. While I would hope that Dad would have traveled to these places just to see me, we all knew the real reason he put up with the hours on a plane and jet lag was his grandkids. Dad was a quiet man with a gentle spirit and a strong faith in God. He loved his family and was a rock of stability for all of us. He represented to his family and many others so many things. As his family, our whole world seemed to be anchored by his quiet strength and steadiness. So the news 4 years ago that he had cancer sent a quake through the foundation of all our lives. Oddly, I think Dad was the only one who didn't seem affected. He fought this disease for 4 years. Only about 6% of people with stage 4 colon cancer see their 5th year. But the chemo and the cancer took its toll. Because I only saw him face to face every 1 or 2 years when I came back from India, it was easy to see the ways he was deteriorating. Neuropathy in his feet was the worst, but he never let it get the best of him. He remained himself up until the very day he died. In fact, the night he died, we were all around his bed as he struggled to breathe. In order to lighten the mood, I made a comment to Dad about the Indians being on television, but they were probably losing, so he probably didn't want to watch. He couldn't speak very well at that point, and he mumbled something through his oxygen mask. Then, seeing we couldn't understand him, he held up his fingers and said between breaths, 206. That was the TV station at home that the Indians were always on. 8 days ago, he was at work at OTW. And today he's in heaven with Jesus and messing around with his dad, mom, and many other family and friends. We miss him here, though. The Bible says in 1 Corinthians 15, death is swallowed up in victory. Death, where is your victory? Death, where is your sting? I know death has no sting for Dad, which is what the verse is meant to mean. I know he was ushered into heaven by Jesus himself. But Dad's death stings for me. It stings for all of us who are left behind. But I will say this. Because of Dad, I'm less afraid. I'm less afraid of getting cancer. And I'm less afraid of dying. Jesus said, "Let not your heart be troubled. Believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house there are many mansions. If it were not so, would I have told you that I go to prepare a place for you? If I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again, and I will take you to myself, so that where I am, you may also be. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. Goodbye for now, Dad. We miss not having you with us. We know we'll see you again in heaven, and we're looking forward to being with you in one of those mansions Jesus talks about. The world might seem emptier and scarier without you in it, but that just points us to rely on Jesus to fill the areas you've left empty. The Bible tells us in Hebrews 12 that those believers who have passed on before us are watching and cheering us on from heaven. We know that's what you're doing, Dad, and we look forward to messing around with you there soon.